I'm actually not the record holder. I'm fairly new to the field. The record holder is actually Shirley Tellis, who is a well-known yoga researcher in India. And she has been doing this research since the 1980s. She has published more papers by herself than anyone else. So she is actually the record holder. We are actually close colleagues. We are constantly communicating by email, and we attend each other's conferences. So we are well acquainted. She's a good colleague and friend of mine. But our research has been focused on, my research has been focused on two levels. One has been clinical trials. So I have completed a clinical trial on yoga for chronic insomnia. And we showed that indeed, chronic insomnia could be improved with yoga practice. After just 8 weeks of practice, we showed statistically significant improvements in chronic insomnia. Other trials that we have done has been looking at music performance anxiety. Musicians who have stage fright, who cannot perform in front of an audience because they have this anxiety. After 6 weeks of yoga, we could substantially reduce the anxiety. And this is very important for musicians because if they cannot cope with the anxiety, their music career is finished. So this is critical for them to be able to improve their anxiety. It also improves their performance because if they're very nervous when they are performing, this negatively impacts their performance. So by practicing yoga, they can reduce this anxiety, improve their performance, and maintain their career. And so we now have two other studies that are ongoing. One study is a study of yoga for chronic stress. And we are looking at genomic expression, which is a very state-of-the-art technique that looks at activation of different genes within the DNA. And research has shown that these kinds of practices can affect gene expression. They can turn on some genes and turn off other genes. So for example, they activate the genes that are involved in the stress response and they reduce that stress activity of those genes. So another study that we have just begun recently is a large study of yoga for generalized anxiety disorder, which is a well-known anxiety condition. And that trial has just begun in Boston from two sites. One is at Boston University and one is at Massachusetts General Hospital at Harvard Medical School. And so that trial has just begun. And the main project, as I say, in my laboratory has been yoga in the schools. And we have been funded by a grant from our National Institutes of Health, and we were funded by the branch called the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And the goal of this research was to demonstrate that by practicing yoga in the schools, we could reduce the risk factors that students have in taking substances like marijuana and alcohol and tobacco. Because when you reduce the stress and you reduce the emotional problems, there is less desire for them to want to take tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, and even harder drugs. So that project is ongoing. We have just finished the yoga intervention and now we are doing follow-up questionnaires, evaluations to look at the long-term changes in the data. And of course we are writing grants to continue this work in yoga in the schools. The American government and the National Institutes of Health are very aware of the fact that our children and adolescents have a problem with obesity and depression. And so they are putting forward grants. They say, if you write a grant, we can fund this. So we are submitting grants saying that we can put yoga into the school and we can reduce obesity, we can reduce type 2 diabetes, we can reduce depression. And we have been submitting these grants and they have been rejecting our grants. So we have to continually revise these grants and resubmit the grants. It's a constant cycle. And it takes a long time until you finally get the grants.